So a warm, truly warm felt welcome to all of you for joining us here today for the Humphrey Battcock Lecture 2024. My name is Mette Morsing and I'm the director of the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment. And today it is my true delight to invite around 60, 70 of you here in the room and another about 200 online following us and engaging with us here at the Humphrey Battcock Lecture this year. Thank you so much to you, Humphrey Battcock, for being here today, not only today, and for engaging with the Humphrey Battcock Lecture, but for everything you do for us at the Smith School and your engagement with us on a very regular basis. We really appreciate that. I really appreciate your engagement a lot. And thank you for making this prestigious lecture happening here for us at the Smith School and at Oxford University to invite some of the world's most stellar scholars in the world and for us to engage with that research going on out there that we so much need today when we are addressing some of the world's grand challenges. So this is a true pleasure for us that we're doing this again this year, and we did the first Humphrey Battcock Lecture last year where some of you were also present. And to take us through this exciting lecture here today, of course, we have our very own Professor Cameron Hepburn, the Battcock Professor of Environmental Economics at the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment. You are also a senior research fellow here at beautiful New College, and thank you, New College, for hosting us here again this year. You're also the Director of Economics of the Sustainability Program at the Institute of Economic Thinking at the Oxford Martin School. So please help me help you, Cameron, to warmly welcome our lecture for this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mette. It is a delight to be here for year two. Humphrey, thank you again. I can echo what Mette said. It's not, they're not empty words. Humphrey's actually working hard for us, very helpfully for us, and we're very grateful to you for your generosity and strategic support, much like another couple of supporters and donors we have in the room, the founders of the Smith School, the Smiths. We remain grateful to you guys for your support and cunning strategic input over all those years. So today, well, it's a real pleasure to welcome Rebecca, and it's my particular pleasure to say a few words about her. So there's the formal bit and there's the kind of less formal bit. And I've got to do the formal bit, so let me kind of get that out of the way. She's university professor at Harvard, and I'll come back to that in a moment. It's going to have some significance. She's a research fellow at NBER, which is the US National Bureau of Economic Research. She's on a bunch of boards. She comes from a disciplinarily confused, various background, mechanical engineering at MIT, a doctorate in business economics at Harvard. And as I think you'll see today, a wonderfully synthetic mind that's able to pull ideas together from different strands and make sense of the world. She's been working on the economics of innovation, organization change, strategy. We've got various colleagues from the business school with us here today too, to soak up her wisdom. And her lecture today is going to be based on a book, which if you like the lecture, you can buy the book, Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. But the fun stuff about Rebecca is that she showed me a course that she's teaching at the moment at Harvard. And I went through class by class thinking, you know, what can I pinch for our students here at Oxford? And it's a fascinating course. It's a cheeky course. It's got all sorts of stuff in it that I thought, hang on, how does she get away with this? And when I asked her, how did you get away with that? She looked slightly put out. And I think the answer is that when you're as brilliant as Rebecca is, people just trust you to do something interesting and to educate them. I mean, another answer would be that she's the university professor. She'd do what she damn well likes. But I think the reality is that she's trusted by Harvard to teach students in very interesting ways. And I understand I have a little spy from on location who said that at the beginning of this class, she got everybody to sing and dance together, which is a strategy that I'm not sure I'm going to try in my next set of classes, but I'm thinking about it. I'm going to ponder it. Anyway, Rebecca said, keep expectations low. I'm not sure I've succeeded to doing that, but what I hope I've succeeded in doing is primed you to start thinking differently about this challenge that we have in front of us, because I know she's going to ask us to broaden our horizons and think differently. This is not going to be a straightforward business econ lecture. And with that, Professor Henderson, I welcome you to the stage.
Cameron, thank you for that very friendly introduction. And thank you for setting things up, because this is not going to be a business economics talk. And Humphrey, I hope that's okay with you. I'm going to push us a little, and I hope it will be interesting and fun. So let me begin by asking you to turn to the person next to you, or if you are married to the person next to you or otherwise close, someone else, introduce yourself and talk for a minute or two about something that happened this week that gave you joy. 1 minute each, someone near you. Okay. Okay. So why did I ask you to do this? I asked you to do this because I am about to argue that we will be unable to address the challenge of climate change successfully unless we can access a different part of ourselves, and that becomes legitimate and understood. That for the last 20 years, those of us in this area, and I'm assuming that's why you're in the room, we have thrown ourselves at climate change as a technical, economic, policy problem. And it is, and I spent the last 20 years doing the same thing. But I've come to the conclusion it's not going to get us where we want to go. And we need to try something really different as well. So I'm now going to read you a poem. You ready? This is called What You Missed That Day You Were Absent from 4th grade. And for those of you who are not American, 4th grade is sort of your 8, 9, 10. So the day you were absent from class when you were small. It's by Brad Aaron Modlin. Mrs. Nelson explained how to stand still and listen to the wind, how to find meaning in pumping gas, how peeling potatoes can be a form of prayer. She took questions on how not to feel lost in the dark. After lunch, she distributed worksheets that covered ways to remember your grandfather's voice. Then the class discussed falling asleep without feeling you had forgotten to do something else, something important, and how to believe the house you wake in is your home. This prompted Mrs. Nelson to draw a chalkboard diagram detailing how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks and how not to squirm for sound when your own thoughts are all you hear. Also, that you have enough. The English lesson was that I am is a complete sentence. And just before the afternoon bell, she made the math equation look easy. The one that proves that hundreds of questions and feeling cold and all those nights spent looking for whatever it was you lost and one person add up to something. So that's where we're going. Here's my argument. Our current approach to addressing climate change relies overwhelmingly on the tools of science, engineering, economics, business, and public policy. This approach has led to significant progress, but is now, I believe, clearly insufficient. So here I argue that this requires that those of us who work in climate change widen our perspective to include a focus on political change. I don't mean the details of policy. I mean, really, where does political change come from? The genesis of social movements and the dynamics of human flourishing. So this is a big claim. I will feel that I have succeeded if you leave thinking, that was kind of interesting. So I think we've been thinking about the world using an approach that I and many other people have called essentially techno-optimism. And what is techno-optimism? It says climate change is a technical problem, and we can solve it by technical means, do the science and the economics, invent the solution, and adopt the appropriate policies to drive their development. I spent approximately 20 years of my life pushing this set of solutions and published a book called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. And it's all about how capitalism can reinvent itself to address the problem of climate change and inequality and racial injustice. It's quite an ambitious book. And it says, hey, we can make a ton of money. And at HBS, we have more than 300 cases detailing how going after these problems will make you money. There's a business case. I'm sure many of you in the room have made the same argument. That if sectors cooperate with each other, if we can make behaving well pre-competitive, then we can also address these problems. So if you think of the problem of deforestation, for example, if everyone agrees not to buy deforested timber, if we all agree to buy sustainable timber, then the whole industry is better off, the world is better off, we're off to the races. There are more than 600 business cooperative ventures trying to do some variant of this across the world. We can revolutionize accounting and finance. We can introduce new metrics. So investors, particularly large investors, who have a deep interest, I believe, in not destabilizing the world's economic system and the climate, can understand which firms are doing well in this area. Firms can shape behavior, employees can hold firms accountable, and we can communicate about the importance of the long term and of creating shared value, of doing well and doing good at the same time. And of course, we're also going to need government policies. That's a given. That business alone can probably only get us about 30 to 40% of the way. And here I usually tell the story about KKR, that well-known tree-hugging private equity firm. Every time they buy a new business, they put in a team to work on water reduction and energy reduction. Why? Because on average, it gives them 15, 16% rate of return. So yes, we also need government policy, and many of you have written detailed papers in this area. And of course, for those of you who are worried about governments, I come from the States, you have to balance free markets and good government. So too much free markets, huge problem. Too much government, a problem. We need them in balance with each other. And to do that, all we need to do is, who knew that saying this would seem wistful, a healthy democracy, the rule of law, free press, and a voice for labor. Classic liberal solution, right? We can solve this social problem through a mix of public and private actions. And I continue to believe it. I continue to believe that we can address these problems and that this kind of balance between the market and government is essential. So business and government must work together. Absolutely, wonderful work in that space. And there's been real progress, right? If we're going to talk about the techno-optimist narrative, let's talk about how well it has worked, which it has. So what's happened? We know the policies required to hold warming to 1.7 degrees C. If we as a global society decided tomorrow, we could do this. This is from En-ROADS, which is a publicly available model put together by a crack team at MIT and some others. If you just Google En-ROADS, it will come right up. You can play with all these policy buttons. You can see how we can get to 1.7. And if you want to go under the hood, you can click on any of these and see the assumptions and change the assumptions. Very cool. But for my purposes, we can get to 1.7. If you're dictator of the world, you could get us there. So that's great news. Governments are stepping up. We have the IRA, the largest single piece of climate legislation ever. Trillions of dollars going into new climate technologies, potentially starting a race to the top between Europe and China and other nations. So fabulous. So much progress. Away from can get fossil fuel and much further and faster than we thought. We actually have renewable energy cheaper than coal. 15 years ago, and I'm a tech bully wrong, fantastic. Average per capita CO2 emissions are flattening. We've got this, we've got this, we've got this, we've got this. It's been amazing. We have the technology, we know the policies, but it is not fast enough. It has not been fast enough. 20 years ago, I thought we would do this no problem. It was so obvious. Price on carbon, move the firms, we're there. But we are not there. If you look at how our projections for fossil fuel use, this is from 2019, couldn't find it updated. The renewables is projected to grow like crazy, but wait, the fossil fuel projections are still basically flat. This is the 2023 EIA projections for sources of electricity generation. You know, the common projection out there is renewables are amazing and they'll take care of the growth in the economy. But we are absolutely going to keep burning coal and petroleum. And if you look at the stock market, the investors think so too. The base case remains 3.3 degrees. 3.3 degrees doesn't sound like that much, right? But I'm sure many of you in the room know that that is not at all good. I could show you 1,000 slides. I'll just show you one. This is from a website called probablefutures.org, which was put together by a man called Spencer Glendon to help people understand the physics of climate change and what was going to happen. And one of its features is it shows maps of projected temperature, drought, flood across the world. And you can click on any country and any county and see the projections for your area. So this is the projection for, at 3.3, days above 28 degrees C, so-called wet bulb. Wet bulb means 100% humidity. So does anyone know what happens to the human body at 28 degrees C, 100% humidity? Do you know what happens? Annette? Well, yeah, humans disintegrate. You die. at 28 degrees wet bulb. And these colors on the map, that dark red is the places in the world where current projections, and this is from the best current science, which is continuously updated, more than a month of the year will be 28 degrees C. And the slightly pinkish says, well, don't worry, it'll only be 2 weeks to a month. And notice it's everywhere. Look at what's going to happen in India and in the Far East and in the equatorial belt. This is not going to be a good time. 3.3 degrees is not catastrophic, and all the work that's been done, all the progress that everyone in this room helped make happen has taken us from a base case of 5.56, which would have been the end of human civilization, to just really, really awful. So this is not good. This is the base case. Meanwhile, we are doing something funky to the biosphere. This is the Living Planet Index, which is put together by the World Wildlife Fund. You can look it up online. It's a kind of measure of the kind of total biomass and the health of the whole system. And notice that this index suggests that between 1970 and 2018, this is the average decline in monitored wildlife populations. Wildlife has declined from 100% base to 20%. We have 1/5 the wildlife populations we did when I was a 10-year-old. This is not that long ago. Just to take one case in point, we have, as you know, a massive insect decline. I don't know if any of you have noticed how in the summer, there just aren't the moths around. When you drive, you don't get stuff on the windscreen. Total global insect populations declined over 41%. We have no idea what this is going to do, but the betting is it's not going to be good. I don't think the current narrative is credible anymore. It might be credible to us, and when I say us, I mean those of us who are highly trained, care a ton about these issues, working in this area. We're kind of like, no, hold on, we can still make it work. We still got the technology. We can do it. I know very few other people who believe it, particularly people under 30. They think we're kind of lying to them, that there's like a real problem and we're not facing it. It's just like if we try a little harder, it's going to be okay. Look at the rates of technology price decline. It'll be all right. But it's not all right. It's not all right. We need political change, I think, fueled by massive global social and political movements. We need to move much faster. And the only way to do that is to get mass support to do it. And now you're thinking, ooh, it's getting a little bit utopian here. Okay. So hold that thought, because here's the issue. We are desperate. Really, really. Anything we suggest, and I tried this in my class, the business school students stood up and said, here's how business can save the planet. Everyone else in the room laughed. The government people stood up and said, here's how policy can change the planet. Everyone else in the room laughed. The divinity school students stood up and said, we need a massive cultural change and a reconnection to what it means to be human, and you should have seen the room. Nothing is plausible. But we have to try, right? So I'm going to give you a story about how we could do this. And I'm going to suggest not that it's definitely going to work, but that we should be teaching, talking, and thinking about it. In addition to all the technology and policy work we also need to keep doing. So here we go. What we need is strong civil society, social and political movements. In the end, business and government respond to people making a fuss. That's just the way it is. You know, you can get business to say all kinds of good things, but, you know, real pressure requires a social movement. We know that major change is possible. It's definitely happened before. 100 years ago, the idea that I would be standing here as a university professor from Harvard was pretty much unthinkable. And here I am. We didn't used to think that people with black and brown skins were human. Now we kind of, yeah, maybe they're human, and maybe we did some bad stuff in the world. So major change is possible and may be coming. Of course, we see the beginnings of stuff on the street, Extinction Rebellion, the Sunrise Movement. But I don't know if you noticed, public trust in government is near historic lows. Democracy is fading across the world. This is data from Freedom House. You should, if you're interested, read the full report. It's very sobering reading. And we have a polycrisis. That means it's not just climate, right? We have war, Ukraine, Gaza. We have decline in social cohesion, rise in mental illness. We have AI, digitization. Who knows what that? We are in a bad place. So I can say, oh yeah, we just need a social movement. Good, but I think we need to go deeper. So where do we go? So here's the interesting bit, okay? Here's maybe how we could begin to start this flywheel. So I want to problematize something that many scholars have called Homo economicus. So Homo economicus is outer-directed. That is, what am I doing in the world? Sees people as instruments. You know, yeah, people are great, but how do I sell to them, get them to work for me, get them out of the way? Deeply competitive. Fundamentally, meaning is in consumption and status. Tends to focus on the pieces. Oh, I don't know about that stuff. I do this. I'm focused here. And largely suppresses or avoids emotion. And I'm now generalizing at a very high level, and my apologies to those of you who know far more about this than I do, but a very high level. There's another model of being human, sometimes called Homo reciprocans. Homo reciprocans is inner-directed. That is, who am I as a person? Why am I here? What's my meaning? Where am I going? Sees people as beings, classic I, thou. No, other people actually like living beings like myself to be respected. Is cooperative and relational, finds meaning in flourishing and connection, focuses on the whole, lives in the body, and is open to emotion. Again, horrible generalization. Of course, human psychology, hugely complex, but I'm going to argue that these sort of two ways of being have been in tension with each other for at least the last 4,000 years, if not longer. So just to make this concrete, here's an example of Homo economicus. This is Roman Abramovich. He's worth $9 billion, former owner of the Chelsea Football Club. He owns 16 yachts. 16 yachts, like what the heck do you do with 16 yachts? We don't know. This is an example of Homo relations. This is Mara Dale. She was my son's high school teacher. She may earn this, according to the publicly available information, if she's earning $63,000 a year, that's high. That is less. So Roman, just from the income on his investments, makes approximately 7,000 times as much a year as Mara does, and she does not own a yacht. So, you know, I'm talking in these generalities, but what I'm hoping to do is give you a sense that this is like a real thing. That's why we talked about joy. That's why I read a poem. There's, in all of us, there's a part that isn't about making the money, getting ahead. I mean, we've told ourselves that's what we need to do to take care of our families, to build the economy. But we know about this other way of being. You've met Homo reciprocans as a teacher, Mara, as a parent, right? You think about holding your children, those of you who have children. You're not thinking about, you're thinking about them and this amazing thing that happens. As a lover, I hope your love is not Homo economicus, despite Gary Becker's path-breaking work. As a friend, as a team player, as a community activist, humans enact Homo reciprocans all the time. But generally in our world, in very carefully defined spaces, in private life and in the so-called caring professions. So it's like, okay, to get real, to make it in the world, I've got to be Homo economicus. That's what's needed. And yeah, there's Homo reciprocans. I'll keep that for my family and my friends, or maybe I'll become a nurse or a teacher. But in the real world, in the world of power and dynamics, we're Homo economicus. So I'm going to argue that we need a rebalancing. And this is a yin-yang sample. Apologies. But the yin-yang is all about this balance. That's what yin and yang are about. Action, outer-directed, quiet, more stable, more loving. So I think we need to balance this, and that at the moment, our society is like, whoa, way double dine over there. So many people who are naturally more Homo reciprocans have got very good at pretending to be Homo economicus, thinking it's necessary. So some evidence that I am not crazy in thinking that the rebalancing might make a difference. This is a rough look at the relationship between wealth and happiness, with each of these dots representing a different country. And there's a couple of things I'd like you to notice. One is, in general, more income does make people happier. So if you're living in Chad or Madagascar or Zambia, it's not, on average, a good time. And if you're living up here in Denmark or Switzerland or Australia, it's a better time. So of course we need economic growth, particularly in the global south. Sometimes when we talk about climate change, I have friends who say, well, we've got to stop growth. I don't think we can morally say that to someone who is living in a hut with no power and no food security. So of course we need to keep doing the economy and thinking about it. But notice too, those of you who are more statistically inclined, that yes, there's a group down here, but look at the variance. Look how much happier the Gambia is than Malawi. And look here, how flat this is. The Brazilians are on average much less well off than the Portuguese or the Spanish or the Japanese or the South Korean, but they are happier. So this Homo relation, the inner directed Homo relation, that is like fun. It's good, makes you feel happy. So rebalancing, I think, is plausible as a route forward. So my argument is we need to strengthen this part of ourselves. That we live in a society that kind of pushes it to the side, but we could strengthen it and center it. And I'm going to argue that might make a real difference. So I think we can change our minds. How do we change our minds? How do we bring this part of ourselves into greater focus and bring it into our professional work? How do we do that? Well, it turns out that humans have developed a wide range of practices for becoming more relational. I have a friend who's an Indigenous activist, and she says, Rebecca, one way of understanding Indigenous culture, or at least the cultures I'm familiar with, is you're always looking out for the guys who are narcissists, and, forgive me, for the people who are narcissists and want to grab everything. And you're always working at, no, calm down, be part of the group. It's all about the reciprocal relationships. And so what do we know about how to do that? Well, we have a whole bunch of individual practices. And I put them in rough order of chronology. You know, the practice of Tai Chi and Qigong, centering, slowing, think about martial arts. What's really important? Meditation and mindfulness, being in nature, painting, art, practicing gratitude, practicing awe. New research out of Berkeley, Dagna Keltner, that humans who routinely practice awe are significantly happier and significantly more likely to be interested in reciprocity. So we know what these practices are. And of course, there's a whole bunch of group practices. So this is where one of my friends said, you're not dancing in class. And I said, sure, we're dancing in class. And we're singing, and we're doing listening circles, a fancy term for sit and listen to each other. Listen, deal with the conflict, spend the time. The faith traditions in some of their forms are exactly mechanisms for supporting this way of being human, as is, some forms of civic religion. So we know how to become more relational. And if you grab a bunch of psychologists of a particular sort, and maybe there are some in the room, they'll start waxing lyrical about, yes, we can support this kind of individual transformation. this can be scaled. Mindfulness, as you know, probably know, has moved from being really fringe to being absolutely central. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, every hospital in the US, probably most of the hospitals in the UK. There's a group in Sweden called the Inner Development Goals, which is a group of psychologists saying, okay, we're not going to make the Sustainable Development Goals without learning to be more present with ourselves, in better relationship with other people, and better able to handle conflict. We're not going to be able to solve the problems we face unless we can focus on the long term and on mutual well-being. You know, one of the really weird aspects of the current time, I don't know if you feel this, is, you know, things are really quite desperate. And yet everyone's like, not a problem. Let's go to the concert. Let's hang out. You know, it's fine. It's not fine. And of course, there's lots of evidence on where the kind of denialism and suppression comes from. Lots of people think, well, what can I do? You know, and it's not up to me, and it's probably not happening. But one of the things fueling that denialism, that tendency to look away, is the fear of what happens when you look. Because what happens when you look, when you really stop and understand what happens, and I wonder if this has happened to anyone in this room, do you feel sad? Do you feel enraged? Do you feel complicit? Do you feel grief? We need to learn to deal with these emotions, to face what is really happening. And I think we need to teach our students. At the moment, I was at a big meeting at Harvard, and they were talking about climate distress. And I said, well, what resources do we have for climate distress? They said, well, students, if they get really, really stuck in this, we can send them to a psychologist. But that's equivalent to only picking up people after they've smashed. I think one of the things we need to do is give people tools to deal with what is actually happening. So this is the Inner Development Goals. They have 5 skills: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. A whole bunch of information about how to make progress against these goals. It's all up on the web. Just Google Inner Development Goals. Super interesting. Another way into this is through the psychology of Robert Kegan, who's my colleague at Harvard. He talks about the way humans evolve over time from basically the incorporative self, wanting to eat everything and thinking this is a baby, like you are the world, through impulsive, imperial, interpersonal, to the institutional self, the self that can see that it is one among many, that it has a relationship to everyone else. And we know how to take people through these stages, or at least something of how to do that. We have many, many NGOs and other kinds of groups working hard to help people deal with polarization, with conflict, with the difficulty they have in reaching out to others around them. So one of the things I've learned as I've got really interested in this is there are proven techniques. One of my friends, she founded the Welcome Table. Her name is Susan Glisson. She works in Mississippi. Can I use this example in here? Do many of you know about the history of Mississippi? So Mississippi is in the deep South, and divisions between black and white are very extreme. And perhaps some of you have heard of the murder of Emmett Till. He was a young black man, and he was shot. No one could bring his killers to justice. Everyone knew who they were. No one could bring them to justice because they couldn't impanel a jury. The county in which this happened is dominated by a white establishment, and they could not impanel the jury. Susan moved to the county and spent 5 years in conversation with black and white. And Emmett Till's killer was brought to justice and convicted just last year. And I said, how did you do that? And she said, I helped people see that our commonality was greater than our difference, and that our love for the place where we lived was enough to help us go forward. And so many of these techniques are place-based. And I suggest that this may be a route for us. When people say, What can I do? You know what you can do? You can work at the community level, find your neighbors, talk to them, work on the school board, work on the transportation system, work in the food system. Build those kinds of connections based on love and respect. Because even if we can't address climate change, we will need those connections as things get worse. So the techniques are out there, people know how to use them. Of course, becoming more relational is about more than changing individuals. Those of you who are social psychologists will know that any person's ability to be more relational is shaped enormously by who they hang out with, the family of origin, the school they go to. So I have refrained from putting arrows pointing in all directions, mutually causal, all over this. But essentially, I'm suggesting we need to think about how to build a relational society. And that means changing pretty much everything. Schools, workplaces, culture, business. I don't have business on here, workplaces. The state, the family, and the social imaginary. That is how we think about who we are and what we're about. Because at the moment, we have a social imaginary called modernism, possibly neoliberalism. I prefer modernism, which is more comprehensive. That is all about science, truth, reason, individuality. We can get there. But I don't think we can. So we need to think differently about who we are and what we're about. A shift in this direction could be, I believe, a powerful lever for broader change. And if I think about my own work in business, I think about the way relationality is shot through my book. It's kind of like in the corner, kind of submerged if you pick it up. But, you know, inner-directed people are much more courageous. Doing good and making money at the same time, it's hard. It requires taking risks and standing up. And so it's not a surprise that in my book I talk about purpose. People who are not only focused on making money, where making money is a means to an end, but the end is making a difference in the world. Classic relation. Relational organizations, I believe, are more productive, more agile, and more creative. This is 10 years of my research career. So just say the word and I will drown you in papers. But I think there is lots of evidence to suggest relational organizations where people are treated with dignity and respect and empowered are much more successful. Toyota is, I think, a fabulous case in point of that. One I think everybody knows, which is, why don't we trust each other? Why don't we give people power? Why don't we delegate? Why don't we work together as teams? Well, why not? Fantastic performance. Relational firms are easier to cooperate with. Those of you who study cooperative organizations, if there's even a 5% chance that my partner in trying to build a cooperative equilibrium is irrationally altruistic, what's your name, sir? Ben. If Ben is irrationally altruistic, my goodness, is it easier to form a cooperative equilibrium with him? That's straight from the game theory. So if we concede irrational altruism, isn't it lovely, irrational altruism? Well, actually, I'd like a livable planet for my grandchildren. Yeah, irrational. I think there's a fair amount of evidence to say that inner-directed people are much more likely to start and participate in social movements. That supporting people in becoming more grounded, more connected, more aware of their purpose and their meaning is likely to help us fuel the social movements that we need. And that relationality is critical to thinking about a new moral political economy. So this is a book by Frederica Carugati and Margaret Levi. You know, I have lots of lefty economist friends thinking about what a new moral political economy might be like how we could structure the ownership of firms, or, you know, how do we build markets that work for the common good and so on. But this book, I think, and my own work reminds us that at base you need the technical term is a new normative order. That is, we need to agree on different goals. That our goals are human flourishing, not maximization of GDP. So here's the systemic model of change that solves everything. All you need to do is reimagine capitalism, rethink government, have them work together using experimentalist government. A wonderful book called Fixing the Climate by Victor and Sable. We need a civil society, social and political movements, and yes, we need inner development, because if we have different kinds of people Even if all of us move a little bit in this direction, everything else gets easier. If we care for the common good, if we focus on the long term, if we can stand and not freak out when we're threatened or afraid, we could build a new society. Examples. I know you want examples. Yes, you want examples. This is a rigorous room. Okay. Mondragon, the Basque region. So Mondragon, a cooperatively owned firm. The goal is the health of the whole region. Managers at Mondragon are paid no more than 6 times the lowest paid workers in the organization, 6 times. You know, the average increase in the US is CEOs are paid 300 to 400 times more than the lowest paid worker. The Basque region is one of the, I believe, the most prosperous and least unequal in Spain. Anderson and Bjorkman, Scandinavia and Bildung, they argue in a book called Nordic Secrets that this is the secret of Scandinavian success, that the movement that spread across Scandinavia in the 19th century, in which everyone was educated in like, who are you and how do you stand and how do you think? That's what made the difference. Who knows if they're right, but it's super interesting. I think post-war Japan, this is a culture that really was focused on the good of the whole. All kinds of complexities in the Japanese case, but I think it's a very interesting example of this. And then a whole bunch of examples from Paul Collier's new book. Paul, it is a fabulous book. About how these dynamics at the social level have made all the difference in Singapore, Botswana, Tanzania, and Bangladesh. And he calls Tanzania a near miss. But in every case, the leaders began talking about the greater good and meaning it and embedding it in the policies and how they worked. And he also has a number of lovely examples of people on the ground triggering these kinds of transitions in society. So, let me close. I see Cameron going, good idea. So what does this mean for us? And by us, I mean, again, those of us who have the privilege and the pleasure of having agency, of teaching, of doing research, of being amongst the, golly, leaders of our society. What are the implications for us? So I really mean this. I think we all need to open space for emotions around what's going on. It's so tempting to go straight to, here are the policies that will fix it, here's happening with the technology. Somewhere in our work, we need to open space for how do you feel? And of course, to do that skillfully with help, with the kinds of tools that will support the students. Statistically, many of you are probably suffering from climate distress. Those of you who've been working in this area. So we need to take care of ourselves too. As I said, there are all kinds of practices that help. I just did a little bit of this with my students, just a little. And they tell me it was one of the best courses they ever took. Why? Because they felt they were in a community where we were holding each other and there was joy and hope. What should we teach? What should we do research on? So this is not fair. I just took it from the websites. But these are the major areas of focus of the Salata Institute, which is the climate institute at my own home institution. We do public health, engineering, business, and policy. I was talking to one of the senior people in the institute about these issues, and he said, look, Rebecca, this is kind of cool, but I just want to get solar panels on roofs. And if you look at the Smith School, no disrespect intended, finance, policy, enterprise law. What are we focusing about? You look at the Stanford door, that's the billion-dollar gift. Engineering, geophysics, oceans, behavioral science, environmental policy. Do you see psychology, ethics, sociology, history? They're not there, right? They're not there. Should we broaden our focus? And broaden should be spelt correctly. Sorry about that. Should we broaden our focus? Well, clearly, I think yes. Not that we should all rush out and be specialists in these disciplines, but that we should routinely be working across disciplines and recommending to our students that they think about these issues. That question in the middle, who are we and where are we going? That question used to be fundamental to Western education, to education in the civilized world, and we have stopped asking it. And when I say we, I mean Harvard. I don't want to implicate everyone else, but my sense is pretty much everyone else. You show up, we're a trade school, we're going to give you the skills. It's not good enough right now. So on radical hope, do I still have 1 minute? So on hope, people often ask me if I'm hopeful. So hope is tricky. Hope is super tricky. Why is hope super tricky? Because sometimes people think, well, if you're hopeful, it's going to be fine. And I'm not sure it's going to be fine. I think it may not be in the way we imagine. That is, I don't think we can decarbonize fast enough to put the world back the way it was. I don't think we can do that. I think we have to go somewhere new. And so hope for me is a complicated concept. And this, if I had more time, I would talk about, you know, we're dominated by the modernist perspective, but of course, postmodernism is everywhere. And postmodernism, yes, it deconstructs power, good, but it's also cynical and ironic. And cynicism and irony is useful, but as an end in itself, I think it's a dead end. So I think we need a new dominant narrative. Those of you who work in this area, I'm deeply interested in meta-modernism, which is the idea that we can take the best of modernism and the best of postmodernism and create a new story for who we are and where we're going. And that's really bad. I hit the screen. I think I disconnected the cable.
I think it can't compute your ideas.
Oh, okay. So let me summarize by saying, I think hope is about not we can fix it. I don't think that's a useful framing. I think hope is about we can make a difference. We can do what we know how to do. Everyone in this room has something they can do. And doing something is going to be much, much better than not doing something. So I think we need hope, but it's not an attitude or a belief. It's a conscious choice that you make. And I think that hope will mean thinking about yourself both as Homo economicus, all your technical skills, all your economics, all your policy, but also as Homo relational, as someone who cares about the long term, who has more goals than consumption and status, and who loves the world and its children. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. What a tour de force. I'm so glad we have half an hour for Q&A because I've personally taken 4 pages of notes. No, I mean, there's a huge amount in there. You look at coming catastrophe and you think nothing is plausible, but something has to happen. I'm just collecting some of the points you made that resonated. We respond to people making a fuss. We can change our minds. We deny because we know what happens when we look. We need a relational society. I also noted this is not a business economics lecture. This means changing everything. We need a new normative order. All we need to do is kind of everything. And it was the best course that your students took. Well, I'm not surprised. And now I think we can all see how it is you got away with it. But you didn't get away with it. You did something important and right. I also noted that, by the way, the Smith School partners with the humanities, with psychology, let me not get defensive on behalf of
it's entirely
our organization. And ultimately, we can make a difference. Now, we've already had a load of questions online. We've got the mics ready for questions in the room. It's my privilege to have a little moment to ask you a few questions. I said I'd start with an easy one, but maybe I'm going to start with a not easy one. Because I mentioned your thesis to someone I respect the other day. And his reaction was, oh God, it's hard enough as it is without trying to change ourselves as well. Now, I think I know what you're going to say, and I think I'm going to agree with it, but I'd like to hear it. What are you going to say? Like, shouldn't we just get the costs down and make the clean stuff cheaper than the dirty stuff? And isn't that the most important thing? And is kind of doing all of this psychology and self-healing and changing capitalism. Do we have time for that stuff?
Oh boy. So there's a Nigerian writer I really respect who cites a Yoruban, what he claims is a Yoruban phrase, which is, the times are desperate. We must slow down. Because here's the thing about not doing this harder work, and I'm completely with you. It's like it's hard enough just to teach the courses and move forward and work with the politicians and do the work. Do I have to do this other stuff as well? So let me give you two reasons. The first is because, and maybe I can't convince you, but I think just doing the technology and the policy is at root renewing, just trying to take our current structure and kind of make it a bit cleaner. And the current structure is not, I think, sustainable. We have the global south, and we've sort of told them that they're going to get what we have, and it's not true. And there's all kinds of people who are shut out from the fruits of our current system. So I don't think it's politically stable in the long term to simply just do the decarbonization, okay, all done. I don't think that's right. But the second reason, which I think is a better reason, is it's miserable. And it might work for those of us who are fortunate enough to have positions where we can kid ourselves we might make a real difference. But it's not working for the housewives and the dentists. And, you know, I think one of the elements of the new narrative we need is, no, we need everyone. And not, we need you to measure your footprint. That turns out, as you probably know, to have been a plant by the fossil fuel industry to distract us from the need for structural change. But no, this really matters. We need a major political and social movement, and you can start small and you can start here and you will feel much better. So it's not so much that all of us have to do both. We need partnerships, which of course I should have known you would have. And we have some at Salada too. So I was kind of caricaturing. But sometimes things are hard, but what are the stakes? We have everything to lose.
Very good. I thought you would say it's an and story, not an or story.
Sorry.
No, but it's absolutely right. Now, the other thing I want to ask you is, so we're here in lovely New College, Oxford, for those of you online. I'm sorry you can't be in the room. We had Evensong drifting through the window as you were speaking as a glorious backdrop to the lecture. And it does make you, whether you're religious or not, there are these moments of spirituality, of something beyond the self, something collectively important that touch us. And partway through your talk, you referred to the different groups of people saying, it's all about the economics and everybody else laughed. It's all about government, everybody else laughed. And it's all about religion, and you had some cackles too. But it also struck me that actually at the heart of what you were saying was something semi-spiritual, not just relational. It's about seeing our position in the greater whole, whether that is belief in a God or otherwise. And should we be laughing at those religious folk, whether it's the Pope or otherwise, who are perhaps offering a lead here? Is there something to be wedded between the way various religious approaches to tackling climate change and your approach could fit together?
Oof. So the one-word answer is yes, but I think one has to speak really carefully in this territory. So for many, many people in the global north, the word religion is supercharged. I may be overgeneralizing, but my students over the last few years don't want to go near it. You say religion and they say bigotry and myth. We don't do religion. So I don't like the word religion. Let's try the word spiritual. Now, roughly a third of the US population defines themselves as spiritual, but not religious. And what does that mean? So let's focus on I think the deepest level of your question, which is, would it be helpful to bring back into the conversation the idea that humans are not simply greedy apes? And that's probably unfair to the apes. But for thousands of years, humans have cared about something we sometimes call the spiritual, sometimes the transcendent, that the sense that there is more going on than simply eat, sleep, die, that's very deep in humans. Does it have an external correlate in the physical world? I have no idea. I don't think anyone can say. Is it for many people a really important source of meaning and purpose? I think the answer is yes. If I were directing like what happens next, I would start talking about the spiritual. I might use the word transcendent. I might use the word the mystery. I might just have a lot of people read a lot of poetry and do a bunch of dancing and holding babies. I mean it. Those of you who have held your child, you feel there's something going on. So I'm going to be I have this weird, I kind of oscillate between being really instrumentalist, like it would be super useful if we had a major religious revival. And we wouldn't call it religion, but we would call it moral, and we would say, this is right. And there would be all these practices centering and connecting. I think it could be a really important lever going forwards. But I don't need to tell this room that, whoa, religion is a double-edged sword. And we have to be very careful. This is why I'm interested in postmodernism. To be very clear, there are many different ways up the mountain, and everybody has a different experience of the transcendental and no requirements. Mutual appreciation and what is useful for group cohesion, what is useful for happiness, what is useful for this society. So yeah, excellent question. You outed me because I will confess we used the word spirituality in class. And it's interesting, you said religious. The divinity school students, I have yet to meet one who is religious. They're not religious. They're deeply interested in what is the meaning of life, why are we here, what makes us happy, how do societies work, what leads to human flourishing.
Super. My last question, I think you've basically answered, so we're going to turn to Q&A, but just so you know what it was going to be, I was going to ask you for, I was going to tentatively and slightly, with some fear, ask you for a to-do list, and I was thinking what I was going to get back is this is exactly the problem. We don't need to do, we need to be. But you've given me a to-do list. Yeah. We need poetry, dancing, and holding babies. So now I know that's the way to solve the climate crisis. And I'm joking, but I realize you're not. And there is a deep point there, and I'm not making fun of the deep point. But let's go to wider Q&A. There's Annette's quick off the block there with a hand straight up. And wait for the mic. It won't sound as though it's projecting because it's not.
Thank you.
But there are 200 people listening to you online, and they can't hear you unless you talk into the mic.
So just one comment or quote by Tolstoy. He remarked at some point that everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves. But moving away from this particular discussion, I wanted to raise the issue of inequality. This is one of the problems that you wanted to solve when writing Reimagining Capitalism. But the fact remains that inequality is growing and our societies are structured in a way that nothing holds it in check. In fact, just about anywhere we can now say 1% of the population owns about 50% of the assets. So it will raise questions of who is going to pay the cost of the green energy transition and who is going to change the trends for growing inequality. And we have a conflict here because the people who have it all don't particularly want to pay for the green energy transition. In fact, they are working on their own schemes, which can be summed up as the survival of the richest.
Great. You don't need a summary, but there are a lot of questions in there.
There's a lot of questions there, so I'm going to pick out the question I want to answer.
Very good.
So I'm going to sound mildly utopian. So this is the point at which I remind us that any solution, it's easy to say what's wrong with it. And I think one of the reasons we're in such a desperate place is because power is precisely so concentrated And it's concentrated at a global level. When it was concentrated within individual companies, you could imagine social change kind of redistributing. And at the moment, the most plausible way we get redistribution is a last disaster, war, and decay. But let me be a tiny bit utopian. I think one of the reasons we're in the trouble we're in is because our dominant narrative is all about accumulation and consumption and wealth. And so, you know, many of the students I meet, they haven't really thought about what they want to do at Harvard, but they know it kind of maybe possibly involves Goldman Sachs or an investment banker or McKinsey, because that's what you do. That's what you do. That's where you go. That's where the power is. That's where the action is. That's what is happening. And so our very unequal order is being reinforced by a tacit moral narrative, which is, well, you must be so rich because you were so good and so smart and so strong and so lucky. And of course, most of these people, some of them worked very hard and did see unusual opportunities, but my goodness, did they stand on the shoulders of giants, and were they lucky? And so one goal of this agenda, one to-do list after holding the baby, is let's have a conversation about what it really means to be a successful human being and what we really value as a society. And the 17 yachts, that maybe not be okay. And the utopian part is hoping that if we change the narrative, we could begin to change the behavior of at least some of the very wealthy. So that status lies in, and we have some examples, right? Of Gates and Buffett and others, status lies in really doing good in the world. And by the way, that means voting for better controls on corruption and higher tax rates and a wealth tax. And that's a stretch, but that's, I think, where we have to think about getting.
Great. So I see a yacht owner in the audience. I'd like to ask Dome Farmer to defend yacht owners.
One reason, please, small yacht. I guess, well, my question is, how do we get there? Totally agree. It's great to do that. I totally agree. We need to start with ourselves, but we want the world to get there, not just ourselves as individuals. And as it happens, you mentioned the word utopian twice. I just finished a fantastic book by Gregory Claeys called Searching for Utopia, The History of an Idea. And it's a remarkable book because he goes through all the different types of utopian thinking, but also all of the utopian projects that were actually embarked upon, and then discusses what happened. And so my worry is that people are hard to change in a way. We do see that change can happen. There are different cultures, and you showed us the ranking of happiness. So that is about things that we know exist and can be done. And utopian movements have flourished, but then they tend to flounder. And they flounder for various reasons, but they often go wrong. They often tip into authoritarianism. And I guess I'm just wondering, how do we get there? And if we can get there, how do we keep it going? How do we build it?
So 3 things. First, I tried to say this sounds utopian. I don't think I'm actually advocating utopia. I don't think the civil rights was a utopian movement. I don't think the labor movements of the 20s and 30s were utopian movements. I don't think the push in the UK post-war for national healthcare was a utopian idea. I think the good news is we don't have to get to utopia. We pretty much know what a balanced, healthy society looks like, and we have some sense of what the political underpinnings of that are. So that's the good news. It's not in that sense a utopian project. We're just looking for better. And secondly, I want to tell you stories of my students, because you say, well, what shall we do? And the answer, of course, is I don't know. I don't think any of us know. You know, I studied innovation for years. And what I learned is you never know where you're going. The important thing is to start running the experiments. So what we do, like right now, is I'm on the committee that's designing the climate masters at Harvard. So what do we do right now is we make sure that climate masters is not just engineering, politics, and economics, but also has like some of this stuff, and we do it, and these kinds of, so we do what we can where we can. I asked all my students to write a paper. Their term paper was, what are you going to do with the next 5 years of your life? And how does it connect to your broader theory of change? So one term paper was, I am going to start a mushroom farming cooperative in Berkeley, California, because I am deeply interested in local cooperative movements and whether they provide models for how we could sort of redo our economic system. But another paper said, I am going to join the State Department as a climate envoy. And what I am going to do is make sure I build a community inside the State Department of people who understand that radical change is necessary. And we are going to meet and support each other and think about what we could do in the State Department. And I'm going to keep up my personal practice and my personal group that supports me in understanding that radical change is necessary, but it starts in the State Department too. And I had another paper, another young man who's going to the New York Fed, pretty much the same paper. So if you want a model of change, that's my model of change. Is right here, right now, we do what we can. Of course, we have to keep doing the incremental work. It's super important. But we keep our eyes on the longer term and we build allies and friends and we do that work. Not easy, not guaranteed, but eminently possible and way more fun than drowning in despair.
Okay, so I've now got 15 questions on the.
I promise to try and be shorter.
No,
okay.
we've still got time, but let's stay in the room. So we have a question, the gentleman here. Thank you very much. Yep.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hey, George.
You know I agree with so much of what you say, but I just wanted to raise a concern that I work on the psychology of future climate responses, and I fear that what you're suggesting here is going to be a fantastic coping mechanism for dealing with climate impacts, of bringing people together, of sharing, of thinking differently, but not a strong mitigation strategy. My concern would be that thinking about the local, the inner, is a way of closing in one's responsibility to the world. And let's face it, we all know people who will happily fly to the Bahamas if they've got the money for their yoga retreat and feel very nice about it. But that actually this closing in, this insularity is exactly what we do not need for dealing with a global problem. And conversely, that what maybe we need in these social movements is outright anger. It's the things which are almost the opposite of what you're saying, of anger, of blame, of frustration, because that might be the only thing which in the end curtails the power imbalance which leads to the problem.
So to be fair, Rebecca did say we respond to people making a fuss.
Yes.
So how does this all fit together?
I think it's a great question. And as I think about my own work over the coming couple of years, one of the things I really want to do is understand where social movements really have driven change and how much of it is anger and how much of it is connection. And look, we need to think about the society in a different way, and how do we do that? And I understand your concern, but let me try and give you a little, at least open the idea that it doesn't have to be that way. So at the moment, Cristiana de Figueredes, who was from Costa Rica and was one of the climate negotiators at one of the important COPs, she has been working with climate activists. She has been hosting them at Buddhist monasteries to talk about these issues. Why? Because the rage is burning them out. They just can't hold it anymore. So I think, this is a set of people, I suspect these people are also in the room, that learning to hold your emotions and thinking more relationally is not going to blunt the way you feel about what is going on and what needs to happen. I think of the example, and forgive me, I feel very on rough ground for saying this, but Martin Luther King really believed, and I think there's a lot of evidence, that it may be more effective to love the people you are raging against than to simply rage against them. That is in many places, Gandhi thought the same thing, that saying, we love you, but this has to change. And I personally think that may be a useful stance right now. that coming after people, blaming them, is not proving very successful. That in fact, we are the heirs of at least 300 years and perhaps 1,000 years of thinking that the rational brain and technology could get us exactly where we needed to go. And that we were doing the right thing. That shareholder value, Friedman's beliefs were morally based. He thought shareholder value was the only criteria, was a deep moral position, and it was. But it's wrong. And so I think there are many ways to skin this cat, many ways to solve this problem. And that this may be an important way in for many people that may have real effects. Can I guarantee it? Absolutely not.
Oh, there's a desperate hand from Rupert. That was a very keen hand. We'll take that one before I go online.
Thank you very much. I've got a sort of shorter question, which is incentives. The business school rankings, for several of us in the business school here, are all based, half of the rankings are based on your earnings increase over the 3 years after you leave your school. How do we deal with your solution when the incentives are like that in the institutions that we teach and we purport to teach responsible leadership? Should we come out of these rankings is really my question.
Can I paraphrase you, Rupert? I think what Rupert's really asking is, will Harvard show some leadership and reduce the earnings of its business school students? The ball is in your court.
I will say only one thing, which is that in my work on innovation, what I observed is that radical change starts from the periphery. It starts from the edge. It starts from those who have less to lose, or who have less to lose. So I do think this change is coming. I don't know if it will be enough to really shift. I think it's happening right now in the global South and among younger people. We see MBA programs, I'm sure you know them, focused 100% on sustainability, using these kinds of techniques. But no, they're not called Harvard or Oxford. I believe those of us who work in these institutions have a role to play in saying, and it needs to happen here. But do I think it will happen on Tuesday? I do not.
So I'm just going to take one from the digital source here, which is, should we really be reimagining capitalism when what we should be doing is breaking up with capitalism?
Oh, I love this question. Sometimes phrased as reimagining capitalism. Are you kidding? We should throw it out the window. Yes, I have many lefty friends who believe this, to which and to them and to this question, I say, I understand why you feel this way. The current form of capitalism is in many ways remarkable. GDP per head has quintupled while the world population has tripled. We lead lives our grandparents could never have dreamed of. We have solutions to diseases we could never cure. We now have the technology and the resources, if we choose to use them, to support everyone on the planet in leading a decent life. So I think the innovation and creativity that's characteristic of capitalism at its best is absolutely essential. I also think the history of attempting to throw it out has a very bad rap. I mean, if utopian thinking has a bad rap, let's get rid of capitalism and do central planning has a really bad one. So I think capitalism needs to be controlled, both by regulation and by the normative order and by social movements and a strong civil society. But I think that's our best way forward. I am deeply aware I may be wrong, but I think a reimagined capitalism is by far our best path forward.
Okay, won't be surprised. Let's go come back in the room. There's one about purpose at the core of an organization, but let's have Pedro and Steve next, and then Dave.
Hi, Kate. Rebecca. Actually, the last couple of questions reminded me of a debate chaired by Kate Rowland here, which was exactly, which one you believe, no growth or green growth?
Oh, so I love Kate's work. I think it plays a super important role, and her focus on consumption is really important. I think the choice is a misplaced choice. So I think those of us who have the fortune to live here in the global developed north, that we should be trying to dematerialize economic growth as fast as we can. People are lonely. Our education systems are falling apart. The NIH waiting list keeps just getting bigger. So absolutely move into services, move into connection, move into the things that people want. But can we do something about the fact that the houses keep getting bigger and the cars keep getting bigger and everything keeps getting bigger? That I think we really need to address. So we really need to dematerialize growth. But in the global south, which a friend of mine who comes from the global south says I should say, in the vast majority of the world, growth, I think, is something we have to be able to support. And this is one of the reasons we need capitalism. We need the kind of immense technical progress we've seen in the last 20 years so that we can bring people to a decent standard of living in a way that's in balance with the climate. So in the end, I side with Kate, who I believe ends her chapter by saying we have to be ambiguous about growth. It needs to be context dependent.
Okay, a bit of agnosticism there. And Steve?
You started out making the case that happiness was a good thing and that some of the behaviors you were talking about led to happiness, and some countries are more happy than others. But then I felt like you've gone a bit deeper than that later in your talk and in the Q&A. So I just wanted to learn a bit more about where you are. And I know there's an age-old philosophical debate about whether the goal in life is happiness or virtue. Some of the leaders we know who've done incredible good things in society have turned out to be immensely complicated people and sometimes immensely unhappy people, actually. I think that's one of the things we learn as we get older, one of the things I've observed. And also some of the great examples you gave, having children. We sacrifice a lot for our children, and really standout examples of loving your enemy, which was something you touched on. That's not easy, right? So is the goal happiness? Is it virtue? Are they the same thing, or is happiness the right word?
So you should know that when I agreed to give this lecture some months ago, several months ago, I was bowled over by the honor. And I didn't think too much about what I was going to say. And, you know, I kind of assumed, well, I'll just do Reimagining Capitalism, it'll be good, you know, and I know how to do that. And then when the time came, I didn't want to just do Reimagining Capitalism because I am interested in these much larger questions. But I've only spent like a year or two thinking about them. And so I'm at the stage of understanding just how complicated the question you asked is. And I do not know the answer. But I think we need to start finding out. And I think it will be different for all of us.
Okay, that's a meaningful silence. So there was an urgent hand at the back.
Remind me not to do this with you again.
It's very virtuous what you're suggesting. Let me say, I think Steve's got it on the virtue front, but that's my view. Question up the back. Can't even see that far, but.
It's me. Okay. Hi, thanks, Rebecca. So I completely agree with everything that you're saying. And it's interesting, we had a speaker from MIT a couple of weeks ago, and we were at dinner afterwards and having a similar conversation, and arrived at a place where we said we should talk about love. And I rolled my eyes and I thought, I'm never going to say that, you know, in a public space, but here I am. But my question for you is that, you know, I agree with all of your, you know, what you're saying about relationality, but I'm really concerned about timing, because we're in a place where we're possibly 7 years away from a 1.5 degree world. But particularly in the United States, we're in a world where Donald Trump could be president. And how does that square with everything that you're putting forward? Where is the room for these, you know, very meaningful, very important and comprehensive spiritual journeys when you have leadership that doesn't even believe in anthropogenic climate change?
Want some time to think?
No, I think this is Steve's question. Come back again.
If we love Donald Trump, it'll be fine.
It will not be fine. I cannot say this enough. It's not going to be fine. It's going to be very rough. Does that mean we should not begin to walk down this path? I think it makes walking this path much more important. And is this path just about, well, we'll all be happier and we can dematerialize growth, and if we start to think about each other, we'll be happier? Perhaps that sounds like a cop-out, but I've been reading enough psychology to know that for many people, that's a helpful way of framing what we're talking about. Are there people who will resonate more with, this is a crisis of our civilization? We have forgotten what it means to be human and what we should be striving for, and what is virtue, and what is the root of flourishing. There will be people who resonate with that. I'm that kind of person. That's how I think about this. But one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years is everyone starts in a different place. And so there are rooms where I say, it's all about love, but not this one.
It wasn't a business econ lecture though either. So, you know, we're getting there gradually, bit by bit. Then we do have a last question, the gentleman at the front.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my name's Harry. I'm a master's
sir.
student here at Oxford. My question is about democracy and social contracts. I think is a theme that's been going through these questions. But I think it's John Locke who says we tacitly agree to the social contract. And I think that's what we're saying when the Harvard MBA grad goes into the next stage of life. There's that tacit agreement with what we do. But the big questions about what we want from society are never really up for grabs. We have elections every 4 years, or every 5 years in our case. On the 4th of July, we have an election coming up. But there's always marginal questions. The big questions about how we want to live our lives is never really up for debate. So my question is, how do we put the ideas we're talking about today, how do they relate to democracy? And how can we incentivize democracies to like tackle those questions head on? And can that help proliferate this way of thinking?
Just a quick question for you to end with there, not
Yes,
deep.
yes. So firstly, I don't think we know. The gentleman sitting in front of you is my husband, and he spent a lot of his thinking about this issue. So grab him afterwards. His name is Jim Marone. Here's what I think is going to happen, but I'm super aware I don't know. What I think is going to happen is it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And the need to renegotiate our social contract, both locally and at a global level, is going to become startlingly clear. And there's going to be a lot of anger and a lot of push. And I think it will be helpful to have in the world at that time people who are working the agenda I talked about connection and relationality, and about how on the other side of what is happening, there could be a much better world. One that, no, won't be as materially rich as this, but that nevertheless will be a green and flourishing and connected world. And that will be very helpful to have in the conversation.
Wonderful. Well, as I said before the Q&A started, it was a tour de force, but the Q&A was itself a tour de force. I mean, these are hugely, obviously important, significant questions, but they're so difficult. And for you to have approached them with the background that you have, but with the candor, the honesty, the openness to new ideas today has been inspiring for me. I can feel the energy in the room. I'm sorry for those of you online, but there is a real sense of goodness. My mind has been expanded. I need to go away and think about some of that. And I think we can collectively thank you for your vision and leadership, thought leadership in this space. We need more of it, and perhaps more of the empathy that you've shown too this evening. And maybe if we do start with ourselves and this sort of poem.
Another poem. Can I close by reading a poem?
Of course you can. Yes, let's do that. Go on.
Okay. So let me close by reading a poem. This is a testimony by Rebecca Baggott. I want to tell you that the world is still beautiful. I tell you that despite children raped on city streets, shot down in schoolrooms, despite the slow poison seeping from old and hidden sins into our air, soil, water, despite the thinning film that encloses our aching world, despite my own terror and despair, I want you to look again and again, to recognize the tender grasses curled like a baby's fine hairs around your fingers as a recurring miracle, to see that the river rocks shine like God, that the crisp voices of the orange and gold October leaves are laughing at death. I want you to look beneath the grass, to note the fragile hieroglyphics of ant, snail, beetle. I want you to understand that you are no more and no less necessary than the ruby-throated hummingbird, the humpback whale, the profligate mimosa. I want to say, like Neruda, that I am waiting for a great and common tenderness, that I still believe we are capable of attention, that anyone who notices the world must want to save it. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Rebecca, thank you so very, very much for an amazing, thought-provoking, calling all of us, you know, really for that agency. And I love that you in sort of taking our students and our responsibility as educators and as researchers in our institutions around the world and call for us to actually give that, or provide a context. You can't give the agency to our students, but you can provide a context. You can have them dance, dialogue, and engage with each other and with the world. And that may be part of what we do. Just want to, when we were talking, I was thinking of what is it that we bring into our institutions in our classrooms? It is the homo economicus, which is the prevailing figure. And it's built on competition. It's built on inspiration from nature. Social Darwinism is what we sort of bring in there. At the same time, there's another nature we could also be inspired from, and that's what some of my biology friends are telling me. And it's the kind of nature that is built on fungus. You mentioned mushrooms. So experiments, little wood, put a lot of toxicity in the outer circle on the trees standing there. Assumption, these trees will die. Thing is, these trees do not die because the toxicity is transported and shared via the fungus in the soil to all the trees. So they get a little bit, all of them, and nobody dies. So I think there's another sort of narrative about how we collaborate that we also should remember to teach our students. So thank you very much for this talk here today. So now there is some dialogue, there's some drinks and perhaps some dancing, I don't know. One floor down from here. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you very much to both of you. Thank you.